the Prime Minister apprised President Pezeshkian about the three-country visit, his engagements with a number of world leaders, particularly the leadership of Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey. The Prime Minister reaffirmed that with support of the friends and partners, Pakistan's honest and sincere efforts to advance regional peace and security. President Pezeshkian, on his part, thanked the Prime Minister and the Field Marshal for Pakistan's strong commitment to success of our peace efforts, while affirming that relations between Pakistan and Iran would continue to grow stronger in the days ahead. Later that evening, Prime Minister Mohammad Shahbaz Sharif received a telephone call from Mr. Antonio Costa, the President of the European Council. During this cordial conversation, the two leaders exchanged views on the current situation in the Middle East. The Prime Minister shared with President Costa the latest updates on Pakistan's diplomatic outreach and peace efforts. President Costa expressed deep appreciation of our very constructive role. Both leaders stressed that the need to continue dialogue and diplomacy to ensure lasting peace in the region, and also agreed to remain in touch. On 25th of April, the Prime Minister held another telephone call with President Pezeshkian. In this 50-minute conversation, the two leaders held a detailed exchange of views on current regional situation and ongoing efforts to promote peace and stability. Our Prime Minister welcomed Iran's decision to send a delegation led by Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi to Islamabad. This delegation arrived over the weekend, as you know, and it held important meetings, including a detailed 2-hour meeting with the Prime Minister. You may recall that the two visits of Prime Minister Araghchi to Islamabad over the weekend afforded us an opportunity to hold meetings with senior leadership to discuss the latest developments, as well as ongoing efforts of regional peace and stability. So in that context, these visits by Iranian Foreign Minister were extremely important. Coming back to the telephone conversation between Prime Minister and President Pezeshkian, the Iranian President thanked our side for the contribution to the peace efforts and agreed to remain in touch. And so this was a very important series of telephone conversations that took place between the Prime Minister and the Iranian President. On 26 April, the Prime Minister received a telephone call from the Prime Minister of New Zealand, Right Honourable Christopher Luxon. Prime Minister Luxon expressed deep appreciation of Pakistan's contribution and constructive diplomatic initiative. The two leaders also agreed to work together, further strengthening Pakistan-New Zealand relations. And our side, the Prime Minister extended a warm invitation to Prime Minister Luxon to undertake an official visit to Pakistan at his earliest convenience. Ladies and gentlemen, you will be aware that a European Union business delegation was in Pakistan. In fact, some of the delegate members are still here. So this delegation has held business conferences, met business counterparts and senior government officials. And on 28th April, the delegation called on the Prime Minister as well. The delegate members spoke about their respective experience of investment in Pakistan and stated that there was enormous potential of furthering the growth, furthering the investment, promoting business-to-business ties between EU and Pakistan in various fields, including energy, communication, IT. And more than 600 B2B meetings were expected, and many of them materialized during the business forum. Now moving on to some of the important engagements of the Deputy Prime Minister, Foreign Minister Senator Mohammad Ishaq Dar. First, he accompanied the Prime Minister to the three-nation visits to Saudi Arabia, Qatar and Turkey, and also participated in the Antalya Diplomatic Forum. And on sidelines of that forum, he held bilateral formal meetings with the Foreign Minister of Turkey, the British Foreign Secretary, the Foreign Minister of Egypt, Foreign Minister of the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, Vice Minister for Strategy and Intelligence at the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs of Korea, this is Republic of Korea, and President and Chairman Board of Directors at the Foreign Economic Relations Board of Turkey. So these interactions had a very strong bilateral component, particularly the economic content in his meeting with the ROK, Republic of Korea and Turkish delegation. A milestone event during the Antalya Diplomacy Forum was the meeting of the foreign ministers of Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Turkey and Egypt. This was the third consultative meeting of the group. We call it R4, the regional 4 countries. You may recall that the second FM level meeting of this R4 was held in Islamabad last month, and we also hosted a senior official meeting of R4 in Islamabad on 14th April. So at Antalya, the 4 foreign ministers exchanged views on evolving regional dynamics, reaffirming vital role of dialogue and diplomacy in promoting peace and stability and shared prosperity. They expressed a shared commitment to advancing the partnership, deepening coordination, and expanding collaboration across key areas of mutual interest. At the Antalya Diplomacy Forum, the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister also addressed a panel discussion titled Trading Trust, the Future of Economic Integration and Stability in South Asia. Among other issues, he highlighted the role of the platforms such as SAARC and the United Nations, while also reiterating the need for resolving the Jammu and Kashmir dispute in accordance with the UN Security Council resolutions, with a view to achieving lasting peace and stability in South Asia. Very briefly, I list some of the important telephone conversations that the Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister held during this period. On April 19th, with the Polish Deputy Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, secondly with Foreign Minister of Iran, thirdly with the Foreign Minister of Canada and Foreign Minister of Egypt on one single day. On April 20th, he held telephone conversations with the Foreign Minister of Australia and Iran, and April 21 with the Foreign Minister of Egypt and Foreign Minister of Saudi Arabia. On April 22nd, he held important telephone conversation with the Foreign Minister of Turkey and Kyrgyz Republic. On April 24th, the Foreign Minister of Iran and the Foreign Minister of the Russian Federation. On April 25th, the Foreign Minister of Egypt and Turkey, and on April 27th, he held a telephone conversation with the Foreign Minister of Canada and the Foreign Secretary of the United Kingdom, as well as with the Egyptian Foreign Minister. And on April 28th, he held a very detailed conversation with the United Nations Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, and on April 29th, again with the British Foreign Secretary. So this is the listing of. Very briefly, I'll touch upon Israel and Palestine issue, which remained on our agenda, on our focus. We joined a group of countries to issue 2 joint statements in the last 2 weeks. First was on April 18th, and this was on Israel announcement of appointment of a diplomatic representative to the so-called Somaliland. This area is part of Somalia, and we uphold the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Somalia. So this diplomatic representation to the so-called Somaliland is in serious violation of international law. On the second joint statement was on April 23rd, condemning the repeated recurring violation of the historic and legal status of Jerusalem's Islamic and Christian holy sites by Israel, particularly the continued incursion by Israel's settlers and extremists into Al-Aqsa Mosque and Al-Haram al-Sharif, putting them under Israeli protection, raising Israeli flag on its courtyard. Separately, we also issued a press statement in our national capacity on the violation of Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. Finally, ladies and gentlemen, as we speak, our President, His Excellency Asif Ali Zardari, is in China. He is returning tomorrow, I understand. We issued a detailed curtain raiser before he embarked on the visit, and I'm sure you are covering his engagements, important engagements that are taking place there daily. This visit is part of the long-standing tradition of high-level exchanges between Pakistan and China, and it holds special significance in the context of the 75th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between our two countries. So this concludes my opening remarks, and I open the floor for question answers. Ji. इनको दे
Sir, thank you very much. I have basically two questions. A designated NIA court in occupied Jammu extended the remand of separatist leader Shabir Ahmed Shah till May 6th in connection with a 3-decade-old terror case. I need your comment on this, as well as Tada court has dismissed an application filed by illegally detained Jammu and Kashmir Liberation Front chairman Muhammad Yasin Malik. My second question is, Jammu and Kashmir has banned education group Sirajul Uloom over Jamaat links. What are your comments on this?
Thank you. Well, Pakistan expresses serious concerns. You have a follow-up question?
शोपियां में सर जो एक मदरसे के ऊपर पाबंदी लगाई गई है, सिलसिला दोबारा शुरू हो गया. एंड सेकंड, क्या आपने देखा होगा कि मरहूम लियाकत अली खान की जो जज्दे खाकी है वो दरिया के उस तरफ रख कर और एक अंगेज मनाजर थे, और ये जो सिलसिला शुरू हो गया कि जनाजों में भी शिरकत नहीं कर सकते, तो क्या इसका कोई सोल्यूशन है कि सर कि अपने प्यारों की इस दुनिया से रुखसत होने के बाद
वो आप नीलम वैली वाली बात करंट सेक्टर में? Well, thank you. Firstly, on your question, we express serious concerns over the rearrest and continued extension of 3-decade-old case against distinguished Kashmiri leader Shabir Ahmed Shah. Shabir Shah Sahab has remained incarcerated on fabricated charges for 7 years in a row, and maybe many years before that. We understand that he's been diagnosed with a serious health problem, probably cancer, so this is deeply worrying. I'm sure the harsh prison conditions and lack of access to basic amenities in the Indian jail are further aggravating his plight. We call upon India to end the sham trial of Shabir Ahmed Shah Sahab, as well as similar proceeding against other Kashmiri leaders. We have also noted media reports regarding the dismissal of the appeal of Kashmiri leader Muhammad Yasin Malik by a Tada court, as you referred. We express serious concerns over the continued detention and imprisonment of Yasin Malik Sahab since 2009, as well as denial of fair trial in a very politically motivated case against him and as well as similar cases against other Kashmiri leaders. Indian judicial system, unfortunately, which has been seen to grant relief to convicted, confessed individual terrorists like Asim Anand and Colonel, now probably turned Brigadier Purohit, continues while incarcerating Kashmiri Muslims like Shabir Shah and Yasin Malik. So this reflects very negatively on the adherence of justice and fair play and impartiality in the Indian judicial system. It must take cognizance of and do some introspection on how these sham trials are damaging its own credibility. We call upon the international community also to take notice and cognizance of the situation and play its role in basically pressing upon India for immediate release of Shabir Shah Saab, Yasin Malik Saab, and indeed all other political prisoners who have been incarcerated for their voices on human rights and political freedoms. We strongly condemn and on your second question, we strongly condemn on this Indian illegal action in connection with the reported ban and sealing of Jamia Sirajul Uloom, which also was referred in your second question, and its sealing, its ban on its activities under the draconian Unlawful Prevention Act, the so-called UAPA, which is in operation in Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir. Banning this educational institution is a flagrant violation of an injustice to poor and unprivileged communities, given its role in providing access to free education to those who are unable to afford private schooling. Jamia Sirajul Uloom has produced reputable scholars, doctors, professionals who have served the society with dedication. So the targeting of this very credible institution in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir is part of a broader policy and pattern by the occupying authorities aimed at undermining the socio-cultural and religious identity of the Kashmiri people. These developments point to a persistent rise in Islamophobia in the Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and indeed across India, reflecting a broad pattern of a far-right Hindutva-driven agenda. So such pressures, such measures are inconsistent with India's obligation under international human rights law, particularly with respect to the right to education and freedom of religion. I'll stop at that. Ji, Saleh Zafar.
Thank you, sir. Sir, students of Jamia Millia Islamia New Delhi have staged a protest on the campus opposing a program marking 100 years of RSS. What are your comments on Hinduization of educational institutes in mainland India? And the second question is, I must refer to a video featuring Dr. Udita Tyagi, a leader associated with
Dr.
Udita Tyagi. She is the namesake with the Chief Minister of UP. A leader associated with the Mahila Morcha, the woman wing of the BJP. She really referred to Muslim. I'm sorry, I have to quote her with anguish, pain, and rage, that Muslims were producing children like pigs. What are your comments? She also referred Muslims as a jihadi pigs. This is horrible. I need your comments, please.
Firstly, on Jamia Millia protests, regarding these protests, we have seen media reports in this regard. This is unfortunate. The permeation of extremist Hindutva ideology into educational institutions in India unfortunately reflects a consistent and widening pattern aimed at saffronizing the state and transforming into a so-called Hindu Rashtra. It is regrettable that educational institutions are increasingly being turned into platforms for propaganda and hate-driven majoritarian narrative among young minds, particularly Jamia Millia, which has a very lofty traditions and strong history. The international community must take note of these developments. An exclusionary ideology built on hate poses a threat not only to the very existence of Indian Muslims, including their right to life and human dignity, but it also poses a grave risk to regional peace and security. On your second part of your question regarding the remarks of a BJP women leader, these are hardly new. We have seen such unfortunate choice of vocabulary from the Indian mainstream political parties, particularly the BJP and their Hindutva affiliates. These statements are despicable and distasteful. While deeply condemnable, it's not unsurprising, and frankly it instead reflects a broadened and deeply troubling trend that normalizes such hate speech and increasing marginalization of Muslims. We unequivocally condemn such vile expression of hate speech and incitement. The international community must take note of this pattern. India must uphold its international obligations to curb hate speech and protect the rights and dignity of its minority communities, particularly its Indian Muslims. This side, Anas.
Thank you so much, spokesperson. I'll stick to two questions. First, with regards to ahead of Amit Shah's visit, we're seeing that at least 5 new districts have been created in Ladakh, in the Indian occupied territory of Jammu Kashmir, which essentially brings the total number of districts to 7 in this so-called Indian Union territory. What do you have to say on that? And yesterday, while addressing the federal cabinet briefing, the Prime Minister said, and I quote, that Foreign Minister Arakchi, on his second visit to Pakistan, has assured that he will call back and lay out a plan. Did that call back happen yet or not? Thank you.
Firstly, on your question on the visit of the Indian Prime Minister and the situation in the Indian occupied Ladakh, we do not accept this status as a so-called union territory. It's never part of a union. It has never been, and it will never be part of the union. We strongly reject the creation of additional districts in the Indian illegally occupied Ladakh region. This kind of a political engineering is actually a unilateral action by India in an internationally recognized disputed territory to devoid the region of the legal validity political representation. It contravenes the UN Security Council resolution, and this may neither alter the internationally recognized disputed status of the territory, the Indian occupied Ladakh, or the wider Indian illegally occupied Jammu and Kashmir, whose final disposition is to be done in accordance with the relevant United Nations Security Council resolutions and the aspirations of the Kashmiri people through a free and impartially held plebiscite under the UN auspices. Thank you. On your second question about Mr. Rakshi, I think I can take a few more questions on this subject, and then I promise I'll start by your question.